Now, existentialists, of course, have given, particularly philosophical existentialists, given great thought to this issue. How, if we start from that subjectivist individualist framework where there is no God, there is no science to dictate to us, how do we have any sort of common values, any sort of a common framework? How do we place restrictions and prohibitions on other people appropriately, and particularly how do we teach students to be civil and so on, if we can't do that in any sort of objective or authoritarian or top-down fashion or some such synonymous type fashion? Well, what the existentialists will say is that there really is no answer to that. The philosophers, from their perspective, have not come up with an answer to subjective individualism. They haven't proved that there's a God. We don't want to have scientific dictators telling us what to do. We do want people to be individualistic. And so all we're doing in life as adults is muddling through, right, so to speak. So the expectation that somehow we can magically solve this in the classroom, that's going to be an unrealistic expectation. All we can do is then muddle through in the classroom, dealing with students the way parents always muddle through, the way teachers always muddle through, and the way we always muddle through in life. Certainly we're going to have students who are bullies, and we're going to have students who are disruptive, we're going to have students who are passive, but we have those things in the rest of life as well. How do we deal with those things? Well, we try a bunch of strategies and we wait to see what works. We can try to encourage students who are being passive and not making any sorts of choices by putting enticing things in front of them, but they have to make the first step. Certainly there are students who are bullies, and if we have taken on ourselves as teachers a commitment of providing a facilitating environment, and we have the permission of the parents to protect their children against bullies, right, and so forth, then certainly we can stop the bully from beating up on a child or tormenting them, just take the bully out of a social situation and so on. But then we would have to work with the bully the same way we try to work with anybody who is showing antisocial tendencies. Get that bully to think reflectively about what he or she is doing, what goals is he or she trying to achieve. This is just really the best way to do it. Are there other possibilities, right, available, and so on. That's the only way it's going to solve. We're going to solve the problem of bullying. Simply, punishing the bully and telling him he's a bad kid isn't going to get us very far, and so forth. And then equally so, when we attend to the social aspects of life, many of our students are, of course, going to be interested in social activities. Many of the things that we know they'll be engaging in as adults are intensively social activities, raising families, participating in some business enterprises, the political process, and so on. And so part of our job certainly is to socialize students, but socialize them from a subjective individualist perspective as existentialists here. And so if, for example, we know that students are going to go on to be citizens and to participate in various civic and political projects there, what we should try to do is model that in the classroom. So we might even experiment with more top-down forms of social organization, having assigned leaders and let the students experience what that is like. Try more democratic arrangements, more Republican arrangements, right, and so forth. Give the students a sense of what that is all about. Have them read historical works and literary works in which all of these things are explored and modeled again, and get the students to be a part of that social process, proposing various rules, trying them out for a certain amount of time in an experimental fashion, trying this social arrangement, that social arrangement, and so on, until they then, in an informed way, are ready to make their own longer-term commitments to whatever kinds of processes and so on. But again, the short answer is the existentialists don't think there is a philosophical answer to how we can solve the problems of subjectivist individualism. There are problems there. But we can't just pretend that there are easy and pat solutions that we're going to impose. We have to, and I think the best word really is muddle through as best we can, because that is in many cases the nature of life. Now, I mentioned that the existentialist philosophers have grappled with trying to get some sort of social harmony or social cooperativeness out of their principled subjectivist individualist starting point. And I do want to just mention one thesis that might seem rather historically peculiar, but it certainly is arresting when we think about existentialism reputation for being individualistic. If we take the three most famous existentialist philosophers of the 20th century, I've mentioned Jean-Paul Sartre as one, and Albert Camus, the two major French existentialists. The third has to be Martin Heidegger, the famous German existentialist, and Heidegger was for a brief period a teacher of Jean-Paul Sartre. The striking thing about them is that while in their reputation of the philosophy that they founded and furthered is strongly individualistic, in the politics of all three of those philosophers we find that they are very strongly collectivistic, almost as collectivistic and socialistic as one possibly can get. Camus was a socialist and a fairly far left-leaning socialist. Jean-Paul Sartre was also a communist strongly for a certain phase of his life, was very strongly opposed to the United States and its political system and economic system, which he condemned as being much too individualistic and anarchistic. And then Martin Heidegger was a Nazi, a National Socialist in Germany, a very ethnically collectivistic and economically and politically authoritarian and collectivistic approach to politics. So I'll leave this just as a teaser for further reading and reflection. While existentialism does, in theory and practice, have a reputation for being very individualistic and particularly subjectivistically individualistically, there is this striking fact that most of the major existentialist philosophers are in their politics and their social theory very anti-individualistic and strongly collectivistic.